Today's daf is daf Yudalit. Now, on daf Yud Gimel Beis, Reish Lakish had asked a question called Lotus Godadu. And Rabbi Yochanan said that when there are different minhagim following different shitos, that's not a violation of Lotus Godadu. And Rabbi Yochanan proved this from the fact that Beit Shammai and their Talmidim through the generations were matir eitzaras erva, whereas Beis Hillel would aser. So Reish Lakish responds to Rabbi Yochanan's challenge, and he says, "Misavris asu Beis Shammai kedivreihem." You're thinking and assuming that Beit Shammai continued through the generations to paskin that you can be miyabim eitzaras erva. That's not true. Lo asu Beit Shammai kedivreihem. Beit Shammai would not implement their psak and allow eitzaras erva to be misyabemis, because halach is like Beis Hillel. And once halach was passing like Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai followed suit, and they were noeg according to the psak of Beis Hillel. So there's no agudos. So Rabbi Yochanan, what are you proving to me from the tzaras erva situation? Rabbi Yochanan Amar asu v'asu. It means that Beit Shammai, according to Rabbi Yochanan, continued to paskin and implement that ruling of Yibum for Tzaras Erva, and Beis Hillel continued their ruling prohibiting Yibum in the case of Tzaras Erva. And they would not allow it, whereas Beit Shammai allowed it. So we have here, L'chora, what should be a violation of Lotus Godin. And the Gemara now explains that this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether or not Beis Shammai continued to be matir eitzaras erva for Yibum, and Beis Hillel continued, of course, to prohibit it. That's really a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Biplugta the Rav Shmuel. The Rav Homer Lo Asu Beit Shammai kedivreihem. They accepted the minhag like Beis Hillel, and they prohibited Yibum in the case of tzaras erva. Shmuel Amar Asu v'Asu. And Beit Shammai continued to follow their view, and they ruled in favor of Yibum in a case of Tzaras Erva. Now the Gemara asks from a Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Yud Gimel. The Gemara records that Yotza Baskol v'Yomra, the heavenly voice declared that Kol Makom Tenechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel Halacha Beis Hillel. So therefore, Amos. In what period of time, historically, did this machlokas between Rav and Reish Lakish on the one hand, and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan on the other hand, when was that machlokas? Ilema kodem baskol. If this machlokas is before the baskol came out, my time of demand the Omer Lo Asu. How do you understand the sheet of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish of Lo Asu? There was no final psak like Beis Hillel because it was before the Baskol. Ella, so by process of elimination, liachar Baskol. So my time in the Mandi Omer Asu. How do you justify the shita of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan that Beit Shammai continued to follow that psak and allow eitzaras erva to be Mesiab Emes after all the Baskol came out and said halach is like Beis Hillel? And the Gemara offers two answers, two approaches. One, first approach is kodem baskol. Ukigon to Beis Hillel ruba. That the rov was in favor of Beis Hillel. There were more members of Beis Hillel than there were of Beit Shammai. L'mandi Omer Lo Asu, according to one Mandi Omer, Beit Shammai had to backtrack because halacha kerabin to Beis Hillel ruba, and the Torah says in Shmos Perikov Gimel Achrei Rabin Lahatos Umandi Omer Asu. Beit Shammai continued even though they were in the mute, because Kiyaz Lina Bas Ruba. When does the Torah command us to follow the rov? Hecha de hadadi ninhu. When you have two equal forces and two equal views. So in the absence of any other variable to tip the scale in one way or the other, we go bus a row. But Hacha here, in the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai don't have to be mevatel their opinion because of the rows. Beit Shammai mechad tfei. Beit Shammai have a deeper and sharper understanding of the halacha. And even if they're in the minority, that doesn't mitigate the fact that they are mechudadim tfei. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, I think the Sefer Abba here, that's attributed to Rabbi Yechunya ben Akana, claims that Liyasid Lavo, at the end of the days, we're going to pass like this Shammai, because they're mechudadim. Now we'll go with the second approach. Liachar Baskel. Islamani Abalo Asu, Donafka Baskel. Beit Shammai count out because the Baskel paskin like Beis Hillel. But this is assuming that we rely on a Baskel in a matter of halacha. Umandi Omer Asu, that even after the Baskel, they continue Beit Shammai to paskin like themselves. That's Rabbi Yeshui, the Omer Emashkikim Baskel. This is Gemara about Metzia Daf Mentes, the famous sugya of Tanu Shalach Noi, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yeshua says we don't pay any attention to Baskel, and he invokes the principle of Lo B'Shamayim. Halacha is given to man, not to Shamayim. The Beis Din Shel Shamayim doesn't paskin halachas, so therefore the Baskel has no legal significance. Now the Gemara asks the following kashu: Man the Omer Osu is Karina and Kan Lotus Kodu Tasu Agudas Agudos. And if you're going to say that Beit Shammai continue to rule and implement their ruling to be miyabim in the case of a tzaras erva, then we violate Lotus Kodu. Now, I'm not sure if this kasha of the Gemara is according to Reish Lakish and only according to Reish Lakish, or even according to Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan held that you can have Kshinim and Hagim and divide the tzibur into two. So maybe this kasha is no kasha according to Rabbi Yochanan, but at least according to Reish Lakish, it's a real kasha. Omer Abai Ki Amri Lotus Kodu Kigon Shtei Bate Dina Birachas. You cannot have a split within one city. Halalu Morim Kebeit Shammai, Halalu Morim Kebeit Hillel. Avol Shtei Bate Dina Shtei Ayoros Leslan Ba. If the Psak Halacha evolves in two different cities, one Kebeit Hillel, one Kebeit Shammai, that's not a violation of Lotus Code. It's only within one city. And the premise of Abaye, which Rav is going to challenge now, is that Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, these two different rulings were in two different cities. So Amalei Rava, Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel, Kishtei Batidina Birachas, Dami. They both lived in the same city, and yet Beit Shammai continued Kidivreim according to the sheet of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. So we see that even in a machlokas within one city, there's no violation of Lotus Kodedu. What was Abai thinking? So in the Masifta, he quotes the Ritvan or Adbaz. Abai held that Bebali HaMachlokas Atmam Ein Mishum Lotus Kodedu. As far as Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai are concerned, they are the Bari Plukta. That's not Lotus Kodedu. Everyone is knowing Al Pichi Taso. On others, there's a violation of Lotus Kodedu, and they're the offspring, so to speak, the disciples and Talmidim through the generations split into different cities. But Rava says no. Even over the generations, it was all going on within one city. So now we're back to square one. How could we allow two different minhagim? That like Beis Hillel, that like Beit Shammai within the same city. What about Lotus Kodedu? I'm a Rava. Ki I'm reading Lotus Kodedu Kigon Beis Din Be'ir Achas. Peleg Morim Kedivrei Beit Shammai, Peleg Morim Kedivrei Beis Hillel. Shtei Batidina Be'ir Achas Lesson Ba. Rava comes up with the following chiddush, that each Beis Din is like a separate city. It's like Shtei Oren. So here, in the case of Tzaras Erva, we had one Bezdin that ruled like Beis Shammai and another like Beis Hillel. That's equivalent to two different cities, and there's no violation of Lotus Code. So the Rishonim all ask, the Gemara originally back on Daf Yud Gimel and Beis quoted Reish Lakish as asking, how could we allow Kriyas HaMegillah on different days for different groups of people? And that's considered Bezdin Echad B'Makom Echad. And there should be a violation of Lotus Code. So the Gemara, by setting up Shtei Batei Dinim, might have responded and answered to resolve the problem of Beis Hillel Beit Shammai in Tzaras Erva, but it didn't respond and resolve the problem of Reish Lakish in Megillah. And the answer is that the Bnei HaKfarim would read it in their place. And it wasn't that in the same place they read it on different days. So there were different kriyas in different locations, and that's not a violation of Lotus Code. Toshma, b'mkomo shel Rabbi Eliezer. We're now talking about what's called machshirei ochel nefesh. Supposing I need to sharpen a knife in order to cut the meat or shech the carbon or shech the behema on Yontif. Or, for example, Mila on Shabbos requires an izmel, which is the knife which the Moel uses to cut the Mila. And Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that Machshirei mitzvah dochim Shabbos, v'dochim Yontif. And therefore, b'mkomo Rabbi Eliezer, Karsim eitzim. They would cut down trees on Shabbos when there was a Mila on the 8th day Shabbos. Lasos pchamim l'Shabbos. It would create coals. Lasos barzel. They would now take a piece of metal, heat it up over the coals, the hot coals, and they were able to fashion an izmel for the Mila on Shabbos, because Rabbi Eliezer holds that Machshirei mitzvah, or in this case Machshirei Mila, dochim esat Shabbos. But Rabbi Yossi Aglili, yeah, and we'll soon see that Rabbi Akiva holds Machshirei mitzvah ein of dochim esat Shabbos. He could have done it yesterday, on Friday. Why did he make the izmel on Friday? Another issue. Rabbi Yossi Aglili was matir. He held that Gedi in the Pasuk of Savashal Gedi B'Chlema only applies to behema, to a meat of an animal, but not to an oaf, not to a bird. And in the place where Rabbi Yossi Aglili ruled, that's where his domain, they would eat chicken with milk. And again, the question is the following: B'mkol Rabbi Eliezer in, B'mkol Rabbi Akiva lo. This brisa seems to imply that only in certain locations where the Morah D'Asra held that view, that's where they were knowing like that view, but not elsewhere. For example, Rabbi Akiva never accepted the principle of Rabbi Eliezer of Machshir Mitzvah Dochanas HaShabbos, and therefore, in his area, they would not allow cutting down trees on Shabbos for the sake of Milah. This now we have a Mishnah Klal of Rabbi Akiva, and this is Rabbi Akiva's famous statement with regarding to Milah on Shabbos. Kol malach shef shel asos me'erev Shabbos ein dochanas HaShabbos. If you could have done that same identical malach before Shabbos, we're not going to allow you to override the Shabbos. So now we get back to the question: how could they be matir on Shabbos, cutting down trees from as a machshir milah in the area of Rabbi Eliezer, and in the area of Rabbi Akiva they forbid doing so? This is a violation of agudas agudos. And the Gemara answers, "Hi, my tufta. That's not a kasha. We already answered that kasha. Makomos makom shiny. The Isser of Lotus Godu only applies within the same place. So if b'mkomosh Rabbi Eliezer they were mekil, and b'mkomosh Rabbi Akiva they were machmir on the issue of machshir milah b'Shabbos, that's fine. That's not a violation of Lotus Godu. Who the Karile, my the Karile, when he asked the question, what was he thinking? Salket naitamina mishum chumer the Shabbos kemakom echadami. I would have thought that since we're dealing with Shabbos, which is a chiyuv skila, it's an avera chamura, therefore we're not going to allow for havdeli minhagim in two different cities, even two different locations. We're still going to insist that it's a violation of agudas agudos. Kamash Malon, that's the Chidushia that as far as in Yid Shabbos, even as far as Shabbos is concerned, if it's in Shnei Makomos, there's no violation of Agudos Agudus. Toshma de Rabbi Yavo ki Iklo Liasri de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. When Rabbi Yavo showed up in the location, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi held like Rabbi Shimon the Lesle Muktzah. You had a candle that was lit before Shabbos, then it went out during Shabbos. They used to use oil candles, right? Oil inside a nair, a receptacle. And the question is, can they move the nair and maybe even the shemen after the extinguishing of the light? And Rabbi Shimon Levi, Pascal like Rabbi Shimon, was matir. There's no isum tiltul muktzah. Oh, so therefore, in the area, the location where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that was his domain, they allowed, based on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, moving around the Ner on Shabbos. And that's what Rabbi Yavo did. He himself, when he came to the area of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he was Mekil, he was Metaltel. But ki ichlo yasri Rabbi Yochanan, love me taltel shraga. He was machmir when he got to the neighborhood, the neck of the woods of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, who asks muktzah, and Rabbi Yavo l'chvod Rabbi Yochanan was machmir and would not allow tiltul muktzah in the place of Rabbi Yochanan. But now we have the difficulty: how can we allow for these different minhagim? Why isn't this a violation of lo tiskodenu? So once again, the Gemara throws it back in the face of the Makshan. Behind my kusha, what kind of kashas have? We said over and over again that if it's in two different places, it's not a violation of lotus kodadu. So the Gemara now explains the kasha. Anan hachi kamrinon. This was the kasha we would ask Rabbi Yavo. Heichid ovid hachi hachi. Ve'heichi ovid hachi hachi. How could Rabbi Yavo himself change his minhag? In one place, in the place of Rabbi Shimon Levi, he was making. In the place of Rabbi Yochanan, he was machmir. If it's asur, then it's asur all over. You can't say because of the cover that you have for Rabbi Shimon Levi, you're going to be makil and violate an isur muktzah, tiltul muktzah. Gemara answers no. Rabbi Yavo accepted the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Levi. Sphere like Rabbi Shimon, he holds like Rabbi Shimon, there's no isur muktzah. What happens, Vicky? He would not allow tiltul in the area of the Morad Has Rabbi Yochanan, passing like Rabbi Yehuda, and there's an Isur Muktzah. So Gemara says, but why wasn't he worried about his Heizbach, as we call it in Yiddish? Ve'ha'ika Shama. Imagine, the Shamash doesn't know what's going on over here. He sees that in the place of Rabbi Shimon Levi, his master Rabbi Yavo is moving muktzah, and yet when Rabbi Yavo comes to the shtat of Rabbi Yochanan, he's not moving muktzah. So how is he makil in a makom of Rabbi Shimon Levi? So Gemara answers the Modi Leila Shame. Rabbi Yavo was very careful about notifying to Shamish that Meikar did. Anywhere on the face of the earth, you're allowed to move this. There's no Isur tiltul muktzah. We should avoid it because of the covenant of Yochanan. Tashma afal pi she'elu otzrim the elu matirim. Even though Beis Hill prohibited yibum in the case of a Taras Erev, and Reb Shimon and Reb Beit Shammai allowed it. Nevertheless, lo nimnu Beit Shammai mi lisa nashim mi Beis Hillel, v'lo nimnu Beis Hillel mi Beit Shammai. Now watch what's going on over here. We'll start backwards. Lo nimnu Beis Hillel mi lisa nashim mi Beit Shammai. Imagine within the families of Beit Shammai, they were miyabim atzaras erva, which according to Beis Hillel is an Ashes Ach and an Erva which generates Mamzeris, and yet they would marry in. And on the flip side, according to Beit Shammai, a Tzaras Erva is not allowed to get married to anyone without Chalitza. And in the areas of Beis Hillel, they didn't require Chalitza because she's a Tzaras Erva. So why weren't Beit Shammai worried about marrying into the offspring of Beis Hillel when it would be a Yevamot Shuk situation? The Gemara says, "I amit bishlema lo asu mishum hachi lo nimnu." If you can assume, like Reish Lakish, that Beit Shammai threw in the towel once the halacha was determined in favor of Beis Hillel, that's it. They subjugated themselves to that final ruling, and they would not allow its source erva to be mitzvah. It's fine. Eli, but if you're like Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, that asu, which means that Beit Shammai can continue to implement yibum for its source erva, is hamaylo nimnu. How could they allow this to go on? You're marrying a mamzeres. I mean, what's this all about? So Gemara explains, Bishlam Beit Shammai mi Beis Hillel lo nimnu. I could justify the fact that Beit Shammai would marry from the families of Beis Hillel without inhibitions. To b'nei chayve lavin minhum. We're not dealing with an iser of sul mamzeres because we're only dealing with the violation of a lav lo sia eish samesh achutza lishzar. And a woman or a man who's born from that relationship of a Yevamot Shuk is not possible at all. He's not excluded from Kal Yisrael. With regard to Beis Hillel marrying into the families of Beit Shammai, you're violating an Isa Mamzeres because the Tzaras Erva is Eishes Ach, and if you're going to allow for Yibam, the child of such a relationship is a Mamzer. You could only generate mamzeres in a violation of a chayvi mises bez. For example, imo or chamoso, and that's going to be the shita of Yeshua, which we'll get to later. But if somebody is born from bias iser eshes ach, which is a chi of karis, there's no mamzeres. Where rejects this. Rabbi Lazar, afal pichnechku Beit Shammai silbit saros, modim she'ein mamzer ella mimisha isuro iser erva v'yonush karis. So we see clearly from the statement of Rabbi Lazar that Beis Hillel holds that is mamzerus from an iser erva, which is a chi of karis. So how could it possibly be that Beis Hillel would marry someone from Beit Shammai when there was a violation of Isa Kars in the case of Tzaras Erva where they allowed Yibum, and the child would be a mamzer? Ella lav chmami d'shaloas. The Gemara now disproves the shita of Rabbi Yochanan that Beit Shammai continued to implement Yibum for a Tzaras Erva, which means that the child, according to Beis Hillel, would be a mamzer, and yet we know that Beis Hillel did not abstain from marrying into Beis Shammai's family. And the Gemara rejects it. He says, no, that's low, that's not a right. Liolam awesome. In truth, Beit Shammai continued to paskin and implement Yibum for Tzaras Erva. Ayilesim Beis Hillel to modulei parshi. Beit Shammai were very careful to notify Beis Hillel that these children are mamzerim according to your shita, Beis Hillel. And this is logical, that Beit Shammai would notify Beis Hillel whenever there was a possibility of an iser of mamzerus, to katari seifa kol ataros v'kol atmeos, is shahayu elu mitarim elu mitamlo nimnu. Beit Shammai would not be inhibited about using the kelim of Beis Hillel, elu mitarim elu mitamlo nimnu, osim taharos elu agabi elu. They would borrow kelim one from the other, even though according to the shita of Beit Shammai, those kelim were tmeim. How could they allow that? And the answer must be that there was a notification process.